Sure. Well, thank you for everyone who's joined so far. My name is Eric Keener. I'm one of the founders of Fin and Forage, as well as I sit on the board of the Monterey Bay Tritons. Really excited when we got an email from Dr. Erickson, because she was reaching out saying, hey, we have this presentation that we'd love to give to your community. And it revolved around a lot of the topics that are near and dear to our hearts. Conservation is a big one. 30 by 30 is a really big one that still has a lot of questions and opinions formulating around it. And I think it's a perfect time for us to breach the topic of how we can get involved. And I know that Dr. Erickson is going to be bringing quite a bit more. She is a world-traveled fisherman, including Alaska commercial fishing, which is rad. She has done all kinds of fun work out in the Pacific region and Latin America. I'll let her describe some of that in more detail. But she's got she has a 10-year tenure at the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation and has just an absolute ton of skin in the game. So I think that this is an awesome opportunity for us to be able to learn. We're gonna have some question and answer at the end. I'd ask that everybody please keep it respectful and useful, genuine questions. And I'd just like to personally encourage everyone, like, this is the time where major legislation is being formed. We still have an opportunity to give input, and Dr. Erickson will touch on that in a little bit. And I just want everybody to, or hope that everybody is in line with really wanting to care for our marine environment while still being able to make use of it. So thank you so much for your time, Ricky. And I'd love to hear some more of your accolades if you can share them.
Sure. Thank you so much, Eric. Can everybody hear me okay? There is just a few housekeeping items. There is a chat screen. If you go to your Zoom all the way to where it says more, everybody can feel free to chat any questions. I'm trying to leave time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. We are always available. We do science communications to the boating and fishing and harbor and marina environment. A little bit about me, always hard to talk about yourself. But I have my PhD in coral reef ecology, actually. And I was married to an Alaska commercial fisherman and did my due diligence there, and have been an avid sailor and scuba diver and worked on issues from all sorts of things, from plastic pollution, climate change, marine conservation, and I'm really interested, having been in fishing, and I started diving when I was about 14 years old and was a spear diver myself before we knew a lot about kind of the plights of the oceans in the Caribbean. And so just really value hearing from and sharing with people like yourselves who are very committed and close to the ocean. So with that, I'll jump right in. This is being recorded, so you can share with others as we go through. And I'm just going to give you really kind of a state of the ocean. And this is, really kind of a lot of marine science. And then, as you're well aware, like Eric told you, there's a lot of initiatives and legislation, and the political climate is changing. And so just going to touch on that. We are a nonprofit. We are not the state of California. We are not NOAA. We don't make legislation or promote any legislation. What we do is we try to encourage the dialogue between anglers and boaters and those who do make the legislation. So with that, I'll get started, unless there's any major concerns. I see a chat. I don't have my team. Okay.
Celine said that you are so inspiring.
Okay, thank you very much. That's always nice to hear. So really appreciate you guys. I'm going to give you just a little bit of an overview of the California current This is showing you a map from, I think, the area where you guys are, primarily spearfishing, and the blue and purple is cooler waters, and then the orange and red is the warmer waters. And you can see that the California current system is really characterized by this complex diversity of cold water and warm water currents that are moving towards each other. And the take-home message is they are what drive kelp forests. They are what drive movement and species abundance along our coastlines. And just a little bit of background on the drivers of our California current ocean ecosystem. Again, some of this may be very, familiar to all of you, but I find it helpful to just give some review to these things. The primary driver we have on the California coast is upwelling. These are seasonal winds that shear off of the terrestrial land, and they shear off the surface waters. So they basically kind of move that warmer waters offshore that you see here in the image. And that allows deeper, colder, nutrient-rich water to come up to the surface, and that fuels the growth of phytoplankton. And phytoplankton is just all the little critters that are the basis of our marine food web. And when we don't have upwelling, that's usually not a good sign for fisheries off of our coastline. Another couple of major climate patterns that you should know about is something called ENSO. That just stands for the El Nino Southern Oscillation. And it's a little hard to understand because the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO, has a warm phase. That's what we call El Nino. And those are usually extreme weather years. We get more hurricanes, we get more floods, droughts, and it also causes less upwelling. So El Nino, people start to get concerned. La Nina is a cold water phase of ENSO, and that means that you have increased productivity and typically more kelp forest. Now, another big thing that is driving our California current is what's called the PDO, or the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. Now, if you look at this image on the top here to the right, what you're seeing is a positive phase where you see that blue, again, cooler water during the cold year patterns. And then you have a negative phase that is that warmer years. And this long-term decadal oscillation, it actually historically occurred over a 20 to 30 year cycle. So, when we talk about the sardines and the anchovies and cannery roe and all that, that was definitely a period of positive phase or cold water, highly productive waters that were occurring. Now, what's happened with climate change and warming of our oceans is we're seeing this Pacific Decadal Oscillation get much more erratic and shifting much more quickly in time. So if you look at this image on the bottom, you see that you had about, you had big periods of the red or the blue. That's all you got to notice there. And as you move out to the 2000s, we even had a shift in the PDO in as little as 10 months. And that is a big impact to our fisheries. So what's happening as a consequence of these changing climate and kind of large scale oceanographic events? So we're seeing sea surface temperature increasing significantly, and it's actually accelerating more than we had initially predicted as scientists. One of the things that's doing is creating stratification. And all you got to do with stratification is think of basically layers of different bodies or temperatures or conditions, meaning turbid or less turbid, more productive, less phytoplankton, having different oxygen depth zones. So oxygen, you need oxygen. It's something called the oxygen minimum zone. And typically that's fairly deep, but we're actually seeing that come up in shallower waters, which is an issue for phytoplankton and zooplankton. We're seeing more events of extreme states. So we're seeing extreme temperature, extreme O2 events, acidification, and then also major wind pattern and heat waves. So the sky is not falling, but the ocean is certainly changing. And this is not a doom and gloom presentation, or I hope that you will walk away with a lot of positive thoughts. So is the Pacific Ocean changing? One of the things that we're seeing is something that we call the Marine Blob. Have any of you guys heard about the Marine Blob? So we had a major blob event. If you look at this image, you see in the Gulf of Alaska, along the west coast of the United States, this red dark area. And it's highly, and look up in the Bering Sea. This is actually where I used to fish up in Bristol Bay, Alaska. Really, really warm water conditions. It was most dramatic offshore between Alaska and Hawaii. And these heat waves or marine blob led to a lot of what we call HABs, or harmful algal blooms, or toxic algae. And that's what shut down a lot of our important fisheries on the California coast. At the same time, we had some weird atmospheric changes where we had a high pressure system over the Gulf of Alaska, and that caused reduced winds. Reduced winds, again, we remember that the reduced winds means we don't have that pushing off of the warmer water from the surface, and that causes less upwelling. That means less nutrients and less productivity. So if you start to kind of think of and get a handle on, you know, how those all interact, and we actually saw a new blob in September of 2019 occur. So what's the impact of these marine heat waves? Well, it's not simple. As always in science, there's losers and there's winners. Some of the losers are at the base of our food chain. So subarctic copepods, krill, market squid, unfortunately, Dungeness crab, that's why the fishery closed down. Salmon can't handle the warm water. Ground fish are suffering from habitat loss due to hypoxia. Again, hypoxia just means loss of, you know, oxygen available for them. Seabirds, sea lions, and seals, and then a lot of those baleen whales. But there are winners. So a lot of the toxic blooming algae actually take advantage of these conditions. Things that are in tropical environments are actually increasing. Market squid, rockfish, we saw some great recruitment years during this period, and tunas and orcas. And you all might be aware that we've had quite some spectacular orca events in California. And what's challenging to kind of unravel all of this is that there's ecosystem-wide changes. So all of these things have impacts that we really don't understand how one thing affects another thing, all the way through the food chain, because we just don't have enough science and longevity to really understand how these events are impacting our oceans. But during this period, we saw thousands of starving sea lion pups. I promise this is my only sad photo that I have in there, but it's just, yeah. Literally thousands of sea lion pups washed up in 2014 and 15. This was due to warm waters where things like the sardines and the anchovies, those species were just not there. And there's been some great research. They've looked into this, and it was not disease. It was truly a starvation event. And we saw that starvation event impact and disrupt the entire food chain, as well as killing masses of seabirds. Now, another byproduct of these changes is our kelp forest, which I know you guys as spearfishers are, you know, really reliant upon kelp forests for hunting grounds. And unfortunately, we are seeing a California coast-wide loss of kelp forests along our west coast. And if we look at things like aerial imagery or estimates of biomass of kelp forests from 40 years ago to today, you know, what we once had were these lush, vibrant forests that were habitat for all the species that we like to target. And today, this image on the right is literally, those are the kelp fronds. And these little voracious predators, the purple urchins, they just feed on the kelp incredibly, and, you know, cut off the kelp fronds, which is what the kelp needs to photosynthesize. And then, you know, the plant ultimately dies. And so this is what is causing urchin barrens. And urchin barrens are, you know, we started to see them in Northern California in 2013. You're looking at just a mass of purple urchins. These purple urchins are, you know, grazers, and they, you know, come up in just throngs like what you're seeing here. They eat the kelp. So why did we see this explosion of purple urchins? Well, that was, again, another complex ecosystem impact from the sea star wasting syndrome, which wiped out the main predator of urchins, are sunflower stars, and that's a sea star. So the urchins eat the kelp, but the sea stars eat the urchins. And once we lost the sunflower stars, which I'll talk about in a moment, that led to this explosion of these purple urchins. The declining warming waters further, you know, weakened the forest. And so what we've seen, unfortunately, Northern California, so that kind of means like Mendocino, San Francisco, Mendocino North, they're seeing over 90 to 95% loss of kelp. Now we're faring a lot better along the Central Coast. We've only lost about 60 to 65% of our kelp forest this far. And this is what sea star wasting disease looks like. So in the upper left-hand corner is a wasted sea star, for lack of better definition. And on the right, you're seeing what healthy sea stars look like. And we now know, thanks to science, is that we thought that it was microbes or a bacteria or a virus. And what we actually, scientists have recently found out, was that it is microbes, but it is, those microbes are actually depriving the sea stars of oxygen. And so if you deprive the sea stars of oxygen, what they do is they literally start to melt off their limbs, their bodies, and the interiors. Literally looks like that, you know, this will age me, but the Wizard of Oz, you know, like, I'm melting. And so literally, I think there was a monitoring study just a couple of years ago, and they found one sea star along the west coast of the United States. There's a little bit of signs that we're seeing some recovery, but certainly not at the order that we need them. So there's a lot of investigation in science now into looking at how do we resurrect our sea star populations, because kelp forests, if we're concerned about climate change and concerned about kelp forests are actually, they sequester or take up carbon, and carbon is a big part of the problem with climate change. And so losing our kelp forest actually exacerbates our problem, because it's releasing carbon, you know, and you think of the whole west coast of the United States, that's a lot of forest that is dying, and we'd like that carbon to be taken up. So there is some science looking at recovery of the sea star. I was just reading a recent paper in prep to try to give you guys the best of the latest information. Scientists seem to believe that they are not capable of bouncing back on their own and may require intervention, talking about some sort of a Jurassic Park approach where we actually grow sea stars in a controlled, oxygen-rich environment, and then release those sea stars into hopefully, a healthier ocean. And that would certainly help with tamping down the population of purple urchins, and also recovery of our kelp forests. Well, sea otters, many people don't like sea otters for a variety of reasons, but this cute little fellow is also integral to the recovery of kelp forests because they eat purple urchins. As you can see in the image on the left, he's got one right in his little paws there. And what we're finding is that in places where we have healthy populations of sea otters, like the Monterey Bay, that it's actually helping to slow the decline of kelp, because these guys are actually eating 3 times more of the urchins than they used to. And what's really cool about them is that they're selective. Sea otters will only eat the healthy sea urchins and not those that are what we call zombie urchins, which are not. So we're really fortunate that in our area, we actually still have healthy sea otter populations. And there's been some talk about using sea otter, what do you call it? Relocation to try to help other places that are in more dire conditions. And as divers and, concerned citizens, I just wanted to point out that there are a couple of restoration projects that are happening in your area. I put the contact information there, and you guys are welcome to reach out to us at any time to find out more. But Tankers Reef has been approved by the Fish and Game Commission for an urchin removal and kelp restoration. There's a petition to allow Lovers Cove urchin removal, and this is a collaborative project, so I urge you guys to all get involved in that. So with that, I'll just kind of, the point of all of that is, what I like to say is we're basically playing Jenga with the ocean or with Mother Nature. Is we are seeing a lot of different things happening. There's many different pieces that are individually being impacted, but there's clearly what we call cascading or trophic cascade or ecosystem. All that means is that you pull out one thing and it actually has an impact on the other. And that's how the ocean works. And as scientists, we really don't understand all those complex linkages. And we're seeing a lot of triggers when we see the impacts of one thing, it is having an effect on others, and it is causing these ecosystem-wide changes. And now we're trying to put Mother Nature kind of back together again. So I don't want to leave you doom and gloom. There are some really good signs in 2021. At last I checked, I just looked at the NOAA and NASA websites and latest data projections. It's actually not super easy to predict whether or not we're in an El Nino or a La Nina. And what I've recently seen is that they're calling it a Nina neutral. So we're not really in an El Nino or in La Nina yet. We don't know kind of where we are, or it's not strongly one or another. But we are seeing some positive cold water. And this is an example of that. This is actually from Southern California, but you see the bioluminescence. And again, that's just algae, and really cool algae that actually, fluoresces. And that is good conditions for, our ocean. So that's it on kind of oceanographic Pacific wide. And I thought I'd just share, since you guys are the, experts on all the species of interest, but I thought I'd just share a few kind of fun facts of some of the species that I think are important to all of you. Is the halibut, people call it the chicken halibut, the bastard halibut, the port sider. I think it's really cool. I've actually saw one of these guys today, a different species. But their eyes actually migrate over. So I've seen little juveniles and they actually look like a normal fish, and that eye migrates over as they actually mature. And the females, they mature at 4 years old or 15 inches, which is pretty small, which is great because that has a lot to do with recovery and the impacts of, protected areas or size limits. And it is open to spearfishing recreationally all year long. We also have the Cavazon. The name means actually large head. It's a voracious, indiscriminate predator, meaning it'll eat anything that kind of moves. It's one of those, again, that is really dependent on ecosystem connectivity, which just means a lot of species need a lot of different places or habitats for their entire life cycle, and they need those habitats to be in good condition. So these guys actually move offshore and move onshore during different stages of their lives. And as a female, I think it's pretty cool that the males guard their eggs until they're hatch. And as you know, the males during this time are pretty vulnerable. So, there's been talk of some measures to make sure that during that time when the males are watching those eggs, that they're not prone to overfishing. Another predator is the lingcod. Most of the species that as spear fishermen that you're going to be interested in are predators. That's what tastes good for us to eat. And lingcod are an ambush predator, meaning they kind of sit really quietly and just they hide themselves. They've got super sharp teeth. They're solitary for most of their lives, and they have a really small home range. And so when you're thinking about protective measures, you need to think about how does that species act? Where does it live? How much does it move? And we'll get into that. And I thought it was cool that males have been known to attack, meaning, just charge humans when they're sitting on their nests. And then finally, we have the white sea bass. I thought it was cool that in California, the current sports diving record spearfishing is a little over 9 pounds. It's a croaker. It's not a bass, and it does that. It got that name because it makes this croaking sound with its air bladder. And there's been we actually did a video with the Calico Bass Club recently that I'll share with all of you guys on the catch and release fishery, a really positive story on how, we can protect species through a variety of different measures. And then finally, the Pacific Benito. This is one of the smallest tunas. They're beautiful, I think, with these gorgeous stripes. They travel amazing distances, and they're really dependent on anchovies and squid. And these guys eat 6% of their body weight every single day. And, as they're reliant on things like anchovies and squid, obviously ocean productivity, temperature of the ocean is really going to impact them. So that's it for my fun facts. You guys can probably teach me a lot more than I know about the species that you're interested in. And now, as Eric said, I wanted to share with you a little bit about the network of marine protected areas. I know there's a lot of legislation on the map for this, but basically a marine protected area is a place in the ocean that has more protections than an area that is next to it. And there's a whole body of literature that shows, how it may increase the abundance and size and diversity of marine life while protecting critical breeding, nursery, and feeding habitats. So as you're likely aware, the state of California, so that's 0 to 3 nautical mile limit, set up this network of 124 places and 14 special closures in California in 2012. So 9% of that 124 places is no take, meaning that's where you cannot fish. And then the remaining, I can't do math, 16 minus 9, is got different designations, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And the reason why marine protected areas, how they work is, as we've talked about, they protect not only species, so individual species. So if you look at this, they're protecting rockfish, they're protecting bat rays and leopard sharks, but they're also protecting the places that those species live. That's the theory and the thinking behind marine protected areas, is that it's not the traditional old single species approach, but in a way, because we don't understand the complexity of how the ocean works, this is a more holistic kind of tool, and it's just one tool for protecting our oceans. Now, I think this is a really valuable slide to show you, and my mom still does not understand this. And the way I like to talk about it, when you say marine protected area, it's kind of like saying, I'm going to a park. And Eric and I might be going to Kenya to look at lions and elephants and zebras, and we're going to a park, or we might be going to take his 2-year-old daughter on a swing set. And that is the same thing with marine protected area. It is very important that when you say marine protected area, when you read about it really, and that you understand the variation, because it can mean everything from a state marine conservation area, which is a place that is off limits, to a state marine conservation area, but a state marine reserve, sorry, which is no take, to a state marine conservation area where the rules vary from every single location, and you have to actually look at the particular rules in that place, to a sanctuary which does not regulate fishing at all. It relies on state and federal fisheries, the Pacific Fisheries Management Council. So the word MPA it's pretty tough, quite frankly, and you have to kind of define what it is you mean. And one of the things that is valuable about marine protected areas is something that we learned in the Caribbean, is this concept of big, old, fertile female fish. And how many of you guys know what that means? BOF, or it used to mean big, old, fat, fertile female fish, but that wasn't PC. And this idea is that as a rockfish, a female who's 14 inches is going to produce 150,000 larvae in a spawning event. But if you leave her in the water or give her a place like a protected area or a size limit, like a size slot, there's lots of ways to achieve this, that at 24 inches, she actually produces 1.7 million offspring. So it's just really important that we protect these older females, and there's actually sex change that goes on in a lot of the species that we are interested in. So that's the concept of big old female fertile fish. The way that marine protected areas are theoretically to help the fishing community is that if you look at this on the left-hand side, you have an area that is protected, and it builds up in the number and the size and the diversity of marine life in that protected area. Then it's thought that eggs and larvae and adults will spill over, that's the term, or move at different life stages out into areas that are open to fishing, thereby increasing and providing benefits to those open to fishing areas. And this is super new evidence because this has been talked about, but it's very, very challenging to actually demonstrate. And this is some genetic evidence. So this is looking at the DNA signal and the relationship or paternity, who their mother was and who their father was for Monterey Bay, actually. And they looked at juvenile movement. And here you're looking at the network of protected areas from some of the blue state marine conservation areas to the red no-take marine reserves. And all you should take away from this is that you're seeing for the first time a demonstration that there actually is movement of juveniles from protected areas within a temperate ecosystem, and it happens to be in our backyard. So this shows that there can be connectivity among protected areas, and we can see some of this positive impacts. There's also some great new data that just came out of the Scripps, I think it was, and UCSB, where they were looking at the movement of eggs. So you're looking at some images here, A and B. You're actually looking at fish eggs in Scripps near marine protected areas. They did some plankton tows, they collected those eggs, they did DNA barcoding, and they looked at surface modeling. So this is based on modeling. It's a little bit different and a one step removed, but what they show is that there is theoretically or hypothetically movement of discrete water parcels from inside protected areas outside, and that there's retention of these eggs in other protected areas. So it's just another good indication that, you know, this network of marine protected areas can hypothetically work. We're seeing some positive impacts from juveniles. We're seeing some modeling data to support that with eggs. And then this recent study was just released, and I'm happy to share it with you, shows the first demonstration of actual spillover for fishermen, meaning did fishermen catch more because there were protected areas. And this was done in the Santa Barbara and Channel Islands area, and it showed that there was increased catches of lobster, nearly double the catches of lobster landings near marine protected areas, even though they lost fishing area. So they saw a 225% increase in catch near the marine reserves. And we've all seen people, you know, fishing the line. You know, I've fished the line. Like, we know that near protected areas, you know, those areas can have an abundance, and all of you who have ever dived Point Lobos have seen it with your own eyes. And this was also a recent study that just showed, you know, the no-take marine reserves around the world can have 600% more biomass, you know, and provide a lot of economic and sustainable fisheries benefits. Yeah, and this is just another one of those cumulative studies where these are looking at just the no-take reserves, and on average, no-take areas are the most effective inside, and the recovery time or the increase in biomass time is completely dependent on the life history of the species that are inside them. So Eric and I, we're going to go back to Kenya on our safari, which clearly I want to do. And if we went back to Kenya and we set up an area that was no-take poaching for elephants, we would not go back in 2 years or even 5 years and expect there to be a doubling or a tripling in elephant populations, because we know elephants have to be like 10 years old or something before they reproduce, right? And unfortunately for us in temperate ecosystems, a lot of the species that we target as anglers they actually take a long time to reproduce. So, 10 years is not an unreasonable time for us to start to see those impacts. So that's it for kind of the science of marine protected areas specifically. This is just an image of the red no-take marine reserves, places like Elkhorn Slough, SMR, Asillamar, SMR, Carmel Pinnacles, and then these blue SMCAs that are these, state marine conservation areas where you can see the rules and regulations vary from place to place to place. So in Point Lobos, you can take salmon and albacore, and some commercial take of spot prawn is allowed, but in other places, like Pacific Grove Marine Gardens, you can take finfish, or most of the fish that we would be interested in taking is allowed, but commercial fishing isn't. So I highly recommend that, and we'll share all of this with you, that unfortunately, it's pretty tough to know the rules for SMCAs unless you really just take the time to look at what those particular rules are. If you see a red one, it's a no-go kind of zone. And again, this is just looking at Ed Ricketts and Pacific Grove Marine Gardens. Pacific Grove has extensive tide pool areas, but you can't take any tide pool critters, but you can fish for species like lingcod, surf perch, cavazon, and blue rockfish. So it's not surprising that it's confusing, is kind of my point. So now I wanted to touch on what Eric was talking about earlier. So there are two big initiatives, and I'm fully aware that this is causing a lot of heartburn as it should, in the recreational fishing community. So President Biden established what he called a national executive order that's called 30 by 30. That means the United States will protect 30% of our land and our ocean by the year 2030. It's a target. It's unlikely that we're going to get there, but it's a target, as many of these things are. Then our Governor Newsom, followed suit with an executive order by the state of California that says the same thing. That says California will protect 30% of our land and our ocean by the year 2030. Now, an important thing is that nobody, neither at the national or the state level, defined what they mean by protect. And that was, as far as I understand, extremely intentional, because they didn't want to set arbitrary definitions before hearing from anybody. And I want to point out a couple things, and I know I'm going to get a lot of questions on that, and happy to answer them. If you're looking at the United States nationally, so I put this image up there for you to see. Looking nationally, the Pacific has, the most protection out of any other region in the United States. So if I were the president or some committee for the president, you'd look at places like New England, the South Atlantic, the Caribbean, the North Pacific are much more in need of protection than the Pacific. So, and if you look at California particularly, if you calculate protections for the state of California, including federal waters and state waters, we're already at 40%, depending on how you define it. So I just want to point that out. And I have not heard, we're a nonprofit, and like I said, we don't promote or go against issues. We're not an advocacy organization, but we work with the state, we work with NGOs. what we have heard in the NGO community is a real focus on, we have this network of marine protected areas. We don't know how they're functioning. We need to do an assessment of them. The 2022 review is coming up next year, and we need to know how we're faring before we even begin to think about doing anything different. And I have heard nothing different than that from either the state or the NGO community. There's really just this focus on understanding, where are we at, what's working, what's being threatened, and how are other things. Conservation and protect does not mean protected areas. Everybody's kind of jumped to that, but there are many other ways, like sea otters, like urchin removal, like, kelp forest restoration. I mean, a whole suite of techniques that contribute to conservation that does not include putting places off limits to fishing. Oopsie, I don't know how to. So Eric wanted me to provide, there were a series apparently of regional stakeholder webinars, but again, you do not need to jot down notes. I'm going to give this slide deck to Eric. We can send it out to everybody who signed up, but public input is being accepted into this process for California. So it's the California Natural Resources Agency who is the lead on this. They're accepting any kind of comments through September 3rd. You can also submit your own 650-word message. You can upload a file. You can come together as a group. You can, as a, Fin and Forage or Monterey Tritons, write a letter. So there's lots of ways to provide input, and we, can provide another talk on this as this unfolds. And honestly, I don't think that anybody knows what this is going to look like. And what I've seen, and I've been on calls and meetings on this, the real emphasis that I've seen, at least initially over the next couple years, is really focused on land conservation, fire suppression, drought issues, and the ocean piece of it seems to be on hold until we can do this review of the 2022 decadal review of the network of marine protected areas. So one thing I'd love to urge you guys is to, as you're out there in the water, to provide information on when you see something weird, because with climate change, we are seeing strange fish in weird places. And there is a database. It actually comes out of CSUMB in our backyard again. And please, submit if you see something weird, if you see a tropical species in your area. They're really trying to understand what's happening in our oceans. And, I've talked about how hard it is to kind of know where to find information. Here are some resources. The CDFW website is really the best, kind of up-to-date source of information, because as spear divers, you are responsible for identifying accurately your fish targets before they're speared. So it's always, good to know what the rules are, because they are sometimes changing. And these are all the different kind of mobile apps that are out there. I'd like to highlight Fish Legal. If you haven't downloaded it, it is free. It is phenomenal. It's got great species ID information. It works on the water. It's an app, so as long as you don't have to have cell coverage for it to work. It's got the protected areas. It's got the fish regulations on it. And we're really trying to support these guys, because I think it's just a phenomenal, source of information. We are working with Navionics to try to get them to upload these charts, you know, onto kind of the base charts, I guess it's called, you know, if you have Navionics or a Garmin product. And then there's the mobile website for CDFW. Oopsie. Why doesn't that should, okay. So now I get to unmute you all if little Ricky can figure out how to do that. Unmute you all. Allow participants to, or if we have questions in the chat, I don't know if I have Caitlin on to somebody to moderate and kind of I've got Caitlin on, and I'll ask Caitlin to, I know some of you guys have been patiently waiting to ask some questions, but we'd love to hear like how you what guidelines you use and how you actually are, contributing to conservation or hear any of your questions. So Caitlin, are you on, or Eric, are you on to, I know we
Yes,
have
I am on, and
Okay.
I'm catching up with some questions in the chat box. So thank you guys for being patient with me. Lots of good questions in there. But if you guys have anything else, feel free to just type that in there and I'll call it out for Ricky to answer.
If I can.
If she can. If she can, I'll try. And if we both can't, we'll follow up by email.
Exactly. So do we have any questions there? Raise your hand if you have a question, or should I just unmute everybody, Caitlin? Did I lose Caitlin? Hang on a second. Okay. Caitlin, are you
Thank
unmuted?
you. I'm
okay.
back. Yes.
Sorry. Okay.
No, it's okay.
Go for it.
Got muted again. So there is actually a question. Someone is wanting to know who is leading the MPA review. And how will those results be socialized?
Yes, that is a really, really good question. So the Decadal review, it will be 10 years next year, the 2022 MPA network-wide Decadal review. There are a series of studies that are, sorry, I've got a lot of wind in my background and I can't mute it. There is a science team, there's an economic and social team. The managing agency is the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So they are the ones in charge of it. And the way that they have characterized the review is that in late 2022, they will be sharing the findings of these studies and gatherings of scientists and public input on the effectiveness and success of the network of marine protected areas. That will be presented to the Fish and Game Commission at the Fish and Game Commission meeting in December 2022. And that at that time, there will be no decisions being made about it. It will just kind of initiate the dialogue with the community, with the stakeholders about what, if anything, needs to change. Did that answer that question?
Yes, I think so. And, we can also, I don't know, maybe it's one of those things we get a list going with all of the registration emails. We can kind of follow up as we start to find out more information about this. And I do know that the state is looking forward to hearing from everyone and sharing results and progress to date.
Yeah.
So This is an easy one for you, Ricky. Will there be any more presentations like this?
Absolutely. If you guys like this, this is an area that we think is important. This is what we see our unique niche is helping to facilitate a dialogue. We are not a state agency, so we can talk in different language and hopefully speak in a way that is hopefully easier to understand, allow for, a conversation about this. And if you all are interested and are members of other clubs or think that there is an opportunity for this kind of conversation to occur as the Decadal review, gets underway, as the 30 by 30 dialogue gets underway, as more and more science studies become, we are learning all the time about what's happening to our ocean. And it's not easy to understand. And that's kind of our role, is to digest this material in a way that is palatable or, able for others.
Okay, and we have had more run in. So what are your thoughts on the Green Wave / Humboldt State University Seaweed Farm Pilot program? And what can we do to create more of them around California?
I am not aware of that, so I will have to find out more about it. I don't know who that is. If I can unmute you, if you tell me who you are, I can unmute you and you can.
Jeremy Hoffing.
Okay, Jeremy, I'm unmuting you should you want to inform all of us, but you don't have to. For whatever reason, I can't.
Hello?
There you are. Okay.
Hey, yeah, there's a pilot program between Humboldt State University and Green Wave, which is it's a company doing 3D vertical ocean farming for seaweed and sustainable shellfish. And I know California has very strict regulations when it comes to commercial use, and so I know it's very difficult to create things like seaweed farms along the coast.
Right. Absolutely. So permitting is one of these things, and I alluded to it a little bit with the restoration and urchin removal project in Lovers and Tankers Reef in the Monterey Bay area. It's something many anglers and scuba divers have complained about to the Fish and Game Commission and CDFW and others, that the whole permitting process is so egregious and challenging, that isn't an obstacle to, doing, intervention kind of measures. So I know the state is looking more and more into, and as scientists are basically recommending that intervention may be needed. We have changed nature so much that maybe she can't, take care of herself and might need a little help from, people like yourselves. So, yeah, I would think that, there's probably a whole community that's looking into that, and I can certainly follow up and provide more insight into that after I do a little more research on it.
All right, as a follow-up to that, this is a good one. If you had one ask for the group to help support conservation efforts, what would it be?
Ooh. So I think that, and Kaylin, you can jump in as well. I think what we see a lot of is fake news, or misinformation, or people getting polarized before we understand what is really happening. And I think that I truly am an optimist. I truly believe in there is so much more common ground than there is what differs, what is distinct or different between, all sorts of different groups. I think there's issues with communication styles with, agencies and different groups. And I think that the more open that we can all be to communicating, sharing, we're doing a lot more social media and outreach. If you guys can share anything of value, I think, providing actual vetted scientific information as we all strive to understand what's happening to our oceans is one of the best things. Another thing I always say is, just talking to people about, whether or not, I think you guys are all, very knowledgeable spear divers and are very aware of, some of the concerns that we're talking about, probably know a lot more than I do about some of these things. And just sharing with people, if you see somebody doing, something that's inappropriate or in an area that they shouldn't be, or taking a fish that's, undersized or oversized. Now we're, getting into slot limits and things like that, not in a badgering way, but most people, I believe, are doing it with just, a lack of understanding and awareness. And I mean, it's hard for me to understand what the rules are, and this is our lives. So, I love Fish Legal. I think it's phenomenal. I know it's not a CDFW, app, but it really is, very helpful and informative and interesting. So yeah, I think just talking to people, and I believe we're all on the same team, I believe most of us, are on the same team. And I just like to see people understand the issues before everybody backs into their corners and starts a misconceived notion that there's this giant conspiracy theory to, take the ocean off limits to anglers.
All right, next question for you. How will 30 by 30 be funded?
I don't know that, there's the national level. So theoretically, and if you read, I actually read, I have it here somewhere. It's actually sitting here on my desk. Highly encourage all of you. It's called Conserving and Restoring America the Beautiful. And it's Biden's executive order. And it's actually, like, usually these things are like, you can't even read them, right? This thing is actually really, really great. And he is very clear in this order that it does not mean protected areas. It does not mean, any one thing, that it is really about, again, the federal, national, America the Beautiful 30 by 30 is highly focused on the land. And it really emphasizes things like working lands and cattle farming and incentives for agriculturalists who are doing great things on land, even though they are, making a profit off of tree farms or cows or, vegetable gardens. And he alludes to, although the ocean is, just a tiny part of it, but the same approach in the ocean, and says that there will be, new committees, it's not going to be done by 2030. We're already in 2021. But, theoretically, there will be funding allocated at a national level. It's very focused on job creation in this America the Beautiful, and talking about how there are many, many jobs available in the green economy. It will be different jobs. It will be training. There will be funding dedicated and allocated for training. So I assume, you know, Governor Newsom or whoever is governor will follow suit, you know, with language like that. So, you know, we'll see probably both federal dollars, but I mean, again, if I were a betting person, you know, California and the West Coast would be the last place I'd see the national effort focus on, because we're already at, you know, we're already the most protected compared to the rest of the United States in terms of area protected, you know, spatial places protected. But the short answer is nobody has clarified that yet, I guess.
All right. So next question. Is there evidence that recreational fishing is harmful to species in our area? Are we overfishing recreationally compared to commercial fishing?
That's a really, really tough question to answer, again, because there is so many different complexities. There have been a lot of commercial fishing regulations that, as you all are probably very aware, we had a groundfish crisis in the 1990s. That groundfish crisis is why the network of marine protected areas was initially put into place. It was during, what's his name, the actor, Governor Schwarzenegger, is when it was initially proposed. And it was commercial and recreational anglers who said, groundfish are in trouble, we need to do something. And a lot of different things were done, both at the Pacific Fishery Management Council level, at the state fishery management level with CDFW regulations, and the network of marine protected areas. Together, all of those things, and it's really hard to tell which one did which, but groundfish are really doing a lot better. So, you know, was recreational fishing part of that problem? Probably, but I don't know of a study that can parse that out. But we have rockfish conservation areas that are federal, that have really worked, and many of those are now getting, you know, they're going away because we're seeing groundfish recover. We have EFH, which is essential fish habitat, which protects the bottom habitat. That's had a phenomenal impact. We've had some species protections, you know, things like some of the rockfish that were much more vulnerable. Some of those species are still off limits as we see those guys recover. Marine protected areas are probably part of the reason that we're seeing recovery. But honestly, we don't have a great data set, you know, there's some good information from, you know, CDFW, where they do port sampling, and we're seeing, you know, an increase, especially with COVID, of recreational fishing. And I think there the challenge is just making sure that people understand the size limits. You know, one of the things is that as recreational anglers, people like to target the biggest ones. And we now know that the biggest ones are the most valuable reproductively. So, you know, that's why this idea of slot limits, which means that a fish has to be above a certain size limit and below a certain size limit. That's what a slot limit means. And you might see, you know, more of that kind of proposed over time. But I don't know that anybody can really answer that question. You know, and it's species dependent. Like the sea bass, the calico bass fishery, an awesome example of success. It's not a protected area for calico bass, but they're doing a very successful catch and release fishery in the South Coast, you know, and that's recreational, and they love those guys, so yeah. Sorry, I can't answer that better.
All right. So next question. What caused the sea star wasting disease to be so bad? Was it a mutation in the microbe?
Warming of the ocean. So warming, and like we said, that oxygen minimum zone being shallower, and then the microbes, which there's still a lot of research on, where, like, was that an existing microbe, or did it just, the understanding that I have is that the microbes were always naturally occurring, but they proliferated in oxygen depleted areas, which that occurred because of a lack of, cold water.
Okay, so can you speak to the state regulatory climate related to increased aquaculture in the state?
No. There's a new, I'm on an aquaculture committee. I know there's a lot of discussion, the new aquaculture kind of guidelines. I think there's still opportunity for comment on those guidelines. There's, quite a lot of interest in aquaculture. Some of the conservation groups, have major concerns with kind of long-term leasing of areas and what kind of the discharge limits are. But yeah, I'm happy to answer anything specifically in a follow-up. And if you want to send me kind of what you're looking for, I can follow up on that.
Is there any interest in a focus for SoCal and Baja for future talks?
Yes, we have had some requests from some fishing clubs as well, and would love to, chat with our, Baja colleagues, because as you guys know, like, there's no boundaries with marine species. And all of these things, that we've talked about tonight and shared are, occurring California current wide.
All right, folks, are there any more questions?
All righty. Well, I wanted to, you can always follow up with other questions. We did want to make sure that we would absolutely, please take our survey. Caitlin's going to provide that link in our chat box. I put it here, which of course you can't click on, but we really want to know what you want to know about. Is any of this of interest? Did I bore you to tears? What do you want to hear more of or less of? If you take this survey, you just help us provide you with information, in the future. What formats do you like to hear, information? And as you guys are all spearfishers, I thought I give tribute to Jay Riff, who recently passed away, and just a real, icon in this sport. And thank all of you for all of that you do, and for joining in with us tonight. And I'll hand it over to Eric or anybody who, has anything to add with that.
I also added into the chat my email and also Ricky's email. So feel free to reach out if you weren't satisfied with any of our answers, and we can chat more.
Oops, I'm trying to unmute Eric, but I'm not. There. I don't know if.
There we go.
There we go. Sorry. Okay, Eric, back to you.
Oh, no worries. That was terrific. I'm just thrilled that we got into some of the topics that we were able to and hopeful to touch on. I think there's a lot more here. I would love actually, I'd love to get the feedback on what other topics we could cover from the people that attended this.
Okay.
If you wanted to email that to us or Caitlin or Dr. Erickson.
You can
And
even
I would also like just continued encouragement to be active, how we can use the platform, how we can take part in litigation being put into place.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. Anybody else have anything to add? I thank you all. I want to respect your time. We had scheduled you in until this time and want to make sure you will get a copy of both the PDF and a recording of the presentation. You can get, I hope, right, Caitlin, our email addresses.
tomorrow. I'll send out a follow-up email that has a link to a PDF of this presentation as well as the recording, so you can watch it over and over if you loved it that much.
See all my errors. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you, and thank you all so much for joining in tonight and taking your evening with us.
Thank you very, very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, good night, you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.